Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruben Cedillo. I'm a CHCI Public Policy Fellow sponsored by Bank of America. I'm delighted to be with you today for a Digital Path for Prosperity session. As someone who met with Latino businesses all across North Carolina, and a little bit here too, I understand the need of this issue. On behalf of CHCI, I'd like to thank Airbnb and Crypto Council for Innovation for their generous support of this session. It is now my honor to introduce welcoming remarks from session chair, Representative Darren Soto. Representative Soto was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2016 to represent Florida's 9th District. Now in his 4th term, Representative Soto has established himself as a strong advocate for the environment, hurricane relief, emerging technologies, and the fight to protect the health and the safety of his constituents. He currently serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Committee on Agriculture. He is also the co-chair of policy for the Future Forum Caucus and the vice chair of policy for Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman Darren Soto is running a little late, unfortunately, so what we do is when he arrives, we'll temporarily pause this session for him to introduce his welcoming remarks. It is now my pleasure to introduce our opening speaker, Megan Lynch of Airbnb. Megan is the federal affairs lead at Airbnb. Prior to joining Airbnb, Megan most recently served as a press secretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where she was a day one appointee for the Biden-Harris administration. She was also a staffer to Kamala Harris, serving as her spokesman in the U.S. Senate. Please welcome Megan Lynch.
Thank you, Ruben. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ruben mentioned, Megan Lynch with Airbnb, Federal Affairs Lead. Thank you so much to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute for holding discussions such as this one to raise emerging trends, timely policy issues, and pathways to success in the tech space. I know Congressman Soto is not here, but I also wanted to publicly thank him for all of his leadership, particularly on issues around tech, and most importantly, for communities like the Latino community and all Americans. Airbnb is proud to serve as a sponsor for this discussion. I joined Airbnb just last year because I was excited to work for a company that at its core is about empowering regular people to use what is typically their biggest expense, their home, to generate supplemental income. Today, the majority of hosts on Airbnb share just one home on our platform, and they cite various reasons on why they rely on hosting. One thing we hear time and time again, and I'll make this really quick, because I know we want to get into our discussion, is that the cost of living, as we all know, continues to rise. Home ownership or just the opportunity to build savings, get out of debt, et cetera, is really slipping out of reach for far too many. And for a lot of our hosts, Airbnb presents a digital opportunity for to not only earn money, but to make home ownership more attainable in the long run. In fact, 42% of those surveyed say money earned on our platform helped them stay in their home, and 62% said they plan to use the money that they earned on Airbnb to cover the heightened cost of living over the next 12 months. So I don't want to take up much more time. I do want us to get right into our esteemed panel, but this is just one example that I wanted to just put on your radar of how people are using digital technologies of today to supplement their income or just help set their families up for a brighter financial future. So again, before I close, I wanted to thank Congressman Soto, CHCI, and President Davis for today's discussion. I look forward to hearing from today's panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Megan. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Zach Guzman. Zach is the founder of Trustless Media and a host of Coinage, the first award-winning Web3 outlet governed by its readers. Guzman is formerly an anchor reporter for Yahoo Finance and CNBC. His work has been featured in Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, NBC, NS Embassy, the New York Post, and the Washington Post. Please welcome Jack Guzman.
Thank you. I guess the podium is weirdly placed for some of you, so here I am. This is what I look like. And then I will tuck myself away behind the podium, but I'm super excited to be here. Thank you guys, and thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you CHCI for putting this on. It's an exciting topic. I think, I might be biased, but this might be the best panel all day, I think, because not only the topic, but because of the panelists that are up here with me. We're going to get into a lot of the technology, but I think, to Megan's point, there are a lot of people out there who are really honestly just looking to ways to make money, looking to ways to make their lives easier, and honestly, solutions to a lot of problems that aren't just here in the United States, but problems that are arguably more rampant around the globe. A lot of attention's been on inflation here in the US as we complain about 4% inflation. We're going to get into 140% inflation in Argentina, and how some of the technology we're going to talk about here, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, some other assets, we need not go too deep unless you guys have questions. We can go deeper later on in the Q&A spot. So we're going to chat for about 30 minutes and then reserve some time for everyone to throw out questions if you have any, and hopefully everyone will walk away a bit smarter about this technology and what it means for us in the room, for the country, and the world at large. But for my background, as was described, I was an anchor at CNBC and Yahoo Finance, covered this as a journalist, was there for the big stories, Sam Bankman-Fried and some few others from last year, and I'm also a founder, so building with this technology in mind to let the audience steer and co-own what we're putting out. But I'm arguably the least intelligent when it comes to some of the policies in place here today, and that's why the panelists are up here with me. Excited to have everyone kind of quickly go through quick intros here. We'll make it short and start with Brett here to get a little bit more background.
Sure, thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. Really happy to be joining you all today, and thanks to CHCI for putting this together. A really great event. As Zach said, Brett Quick, the head of government affairs with the Crypto Council for Innovation. CCI is a trade association that really operates globally to advocate for effective and responsible regulation of companies operating in the blockchain space. So our organization is pro-regulation. We would like to see regulation established in the US. Many other jurisdictions are much further along, and we think that creates tremendous risk for US, both economically, from a national security perspective, and really a missed opportunity. So happy to join you guys today. I'll pass it on to Jorge.
I'm Jorge Herrada. I'm pleased to be here. Thanks again to CHCI and all of you for being here. Just a quick bit on my background. I am the director of the Office of Technology Innovation at the CFTC. And as some of you may know, the CFTC has oversight of derivatives associated with Bitcoin and Ethereum and that sort of thing. And my office is very much focused on learning about all the different innovation that's out there and educating people within the commission so that we can do, create better policy to support this. And I also, as a government official, always have to give my disclaimer, which is everything I say today is my own opinion, and I am opinionated, so I might say some things that CFTC might not want to hear. So again, absolutely my opinion. And the other last thing I would say is I just hope all of you start staring at your phones or doing something else. I hate being up here. It's like it's.
We had to drag him up here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, please, don't ask any questions.
Lots of friendly
ignore us.
faces.
I know they're friendly, but there you go. So I'll pass it off to Jessa.
Thank you. Yes, to echo that, thank you for organizing this awesome event. Happy to be here. My name is Janessa Lopez, and I lead the Bitcoin policy for Cash App, which is under Block, formerly called Square. It's kind of confusing, but Block has 5 business units that kind of sit under that umbrella. Square obviously allows merchants to accept payments at the point of sale. Cash App, I hope you've heard of. It's a peer-to-peer payments company similar to Venmo, but better than Venmo. Tidal is a music streaming platform made famous by Jay-Z, purchased under Block. And then Spiral is kind of a business unit that invests in blockchain developers that create open source protocols around the globe. And then TBD stands for to be decentralized, and it works on decentralized ID protocols. So we have a lot going on across the company, but I think Cash App specifically is the business unit I work under, and for the purpose of this conversation, I'll probably talk most about for how it enhances financial inclusion, and the goal is economic empowerment.
Yeah, why don't we start on financial inclusion? I think that's fair to talk about. And I think, I don't know, just curiosity from people in the room, if you don't mind being put on the spot. If you'd raise your hand if you own digital assets or if you've ever bought anything like that. Okay, so we're kind of operating with about a 50%-ish I think, understanding. And I assume probably most of it's Bitcoin. Bitcoin's kind of the most popularly traded cryptocurrency. But we're going to be talking, I think, maybe about misconceptions, maybe about things we can clear up here. And when it comes to financial inclusion, I think part of the main topics, at least in terms of this, is a path to prosperity, as I believe we've worded this panel, is kind of what it can do for the Latino community and how many Latinos are already active in the digital asset space, which some numbers would peg at around like 25%. Although these numbers are always kind of a bit dubious because you never really know who's on chain. Privacy is important, of course. But Brett, maybe just starting off, why this is such an important technology when it comes to inclusion. Obviously the problems I mentioned, inflation, but there's also the unbanked. There's also problems to access. There's problems to actually trusting the currencies that a lot of these governments around the world say are going to be stable. I mean, what do you think is maybe the most important piece of what crypto, what digital assets maybe unlock when it comes to inclusion?
Yeah, well, with crypto at its core is really the opportunity for an ownership-based economy. The promise of Web3 is really to have control over your own information and your data, which is not exactly how our financial system or our economy functions right now. Data is so commoditized in really everything that we do. I gave Google all of my information about where I'm going and what I'm doing because I wanted to know how much traffic was on Mass Avenue today, and so I put my location in there. So really at the core of Web3 is the opportunity to own your data more, where you're not having to just freely share that everywhere. What you mentioned, Zach, about the unbanked and underbanked, as it's often referred to, I think the most recent Fed and FDIC reports concluded that there's about 7 million Americans that have no bank account, and then another 24 million that use non-bank services, which are very costly oftentimes, like check cashing services and those types of entities, which there's a role for, absolutely, but they can be very costly, not the most efficient way. With crypto, as you mentioned, upwards of 20% of the Latino community and many communities are interested in owning crypto and transacting in it. It does create better access for folks who maybe have traditionally been left out of the legacy financial institutions or don't trust them or for whatever reason just have not been sort of integrated into that. The other sort of component of that is that the value in sort of disintermediating the way that we do things comes at a cost savings. And it also comes at a time savings very often because cutting out sort of that middleman that's taking a cut and taking longer to settle transactions, more steps that have to occur through that. It's really a once in a generation opportunity to kind of revolutionize the way that we transact, both in finance and in other sectors of the economy and how we do things.
Yeah, Jorge, I generally the government, I don't know, at least for people who are in crypto and cover crypto, sometimes regulators are always the bad guy. But I know you're here personally. I know you're speaking personally.
Exactly.
I'll let you answer personally
Right.
on what you think, when it comes to inclusion, why it's so important.
Right. I mean, well, again, this is now sort of speaking personally, not wearing the CFTC hat.
Sure.
I mean, when you look at the challenges with unbanked, I spent some time working at the Federal Reserve, and at the Fed, part of what you think about is the fact that you have so many people who, through no fault of their own, living paycheck to paycheck, right? And so what you see with unbanked people oftentimes going to the check casher on a Friday night. And part of that has to do with some of the, failure is too strong a word, but some of the challenges. Even though the people are banked, they've got their paycheck on Friday night. It may take a couple days to clear, and so they'll pay a certain amount of money, whatever it is, 1% or whatever the amount is, to get their money today. And so there are some of these challenges. I think there's some things like FedNow and some other things that are improving and moving us forward. But I think that this is the challenge. For those of us, I've got a decent government job, so I don't struggle with this. But there are lots of people that do. And so these are some of the things. I think that frustration with the banking system is really why crypto was invented, right?
Yeah.
If you think of Satoshi Nakamoto's original thing. So anyways, to summarize, I would say crypto gives an opportunity for those that are unbanked to have an alternative rails, alternative payment rails, that sort of thing. But I mean, to be honest, eventually you do kind of have to get back to a payment rail. Like you have to ultimately get to a bank. It's challenging. If you go to Coinbase, you probably would need, some sort of bank. But I think that this is an alternative. We see a lot of interesting ideas coming from it, and it's exciting. And I think that there are some lessons that will be learned from it that then come back to the traditional finance thing and help. So yes, in general, financial inclusion. The banking system has not helped people, particularly on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and crypto gives some opportunities there.
Yeah, and Janessa, I'm not sure if there's a point to add around, obviously, fintech has kind of been built up around the same idea, is that the banking system has not helped everyone, and therefore you add technology as a layer to it, and maybe it gets better. Why does this crypto piece, and I'm sure, you have probably an understanding of Bitcoin on the Cash App ecosystem and what Block's trying to do. Why is that necessary?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what everybody here has already been alluding to. It's to fill that gap that's been left by traditional financial rails or the traditional financial services that we have currently. With Bitcoin in particular, I'll just speak to that as the most well-known cryptocurrency and the only one we hold on Cash App. I think people believe that Bitcoin represents freedom, and it's an opportunity due to its decentralized nature for people to custody the asset on their own without having to rely on a third-party intermediary like a bank. It's global, and it's the money of the internet, so you can transfer Bitcoin to anyone, anywhere around the world through the Lightning Network nearly instantly and for free. And so that's a utility promise for the future. That's something that's super exciting, particularly for the Latino community. I think if you look at cross-border remittances between the US and Mexico just last year alone, that was $62 billion that was transferred across the border. And if the fees are on average about 6 or 7%, that's billions of dollars each year that could be, if you're using Bitcoin or stable coins to convert that money, that can be, left in the pockets of these hardworking people who are sending money to their family members back home. So that's just like a real world utility use case that I think is important to note.
Yeah, since you mentioned remittances, I think it's such a huge piece of maybe where we're at, where we're going. Just to put it into context with how small, the entire crypto ecosystem is only a little bit over right now, today, $1 trillion. And just to use your example of remittances, I think one company, Bitso in Mexico, did 3.3 billion sent from the US to Mexico in terms of just that one company processing this alone in 2022, which is only 5.4% of the total market. So it's not a very large share. Nothing of what this technology is really touching yet is a large share, whether it's remittances, whether it's payments, whether it's anything that is challenging the old system yet. And I guess, Brett, that's kind of a piece of it, is that we're only kind of scratching the surface in terms of adoption right now. I think a lot of people get excited by extrapolating, okay, if Bitcoin's worth this much now, where does this go? And I know we're not going to get into where people should invest in this panel, but it is maybe an indicator of how far is still yet to come.
Yeah, so a couple of points that a couple of data points and then maybe an anecdote that I'll throw out. So the example of Bitso, a Mexico-based cryptocurrency exchange that, as you pointed out, processed about 3.3 billion in 2022. In 2021, they processed 2 billion. So that's a pretty significant increase. That shows that interest is increasing. More folks are finding this technology to be useful for their needs. So I think you have to put it in that context, that it is ticking up. It may be slow. Also, in the case of remittances, just to double click a little bit on what Janessa said, about 23% of U.S. remittances actually are in crypto, which is a huge number. So they're really, it's a $600 billion global market. They're finding a lot of value in the speed and the cost savings that comes in transacting in these cross-border transactions happening in crypto. As I think Janessa pointed out, the average cost of a traditional remittance is about 6.5%, which is really double the G20 target of 3%. And the average cost for a crypto remittance is about 1 or 1.5%. Which that is a huge savings when you're talking about, migrant families in a lot of areas who are sending $200 or $300 a couple of times a month, and every time they're hit with that 6.5%. So there is a real world use. And then the last thing I just want to touch on, because I think there's a lot of comparisons of crypto and the internet and a lot of, interesting points to make about it. But if you think about the history of the internet, the foundations of the internet were really laid in the 1960s. The first internet browser that many of us remember using was in the 1990s. Then we had the first App Store when the App Store was created in 2008. And then from there, really the innovation of all of the different e-commerce platforms and fintech companies and all of the things that power our lives now that we couldn't imagine really not having, even though really we haven't had them that long. But that's 50 years of history. So when you think about that context of really how Web 1 and Web 2 have developed over time, Bitcoin came to be in 2009, Ethereum 2015. So when you compare the timelines, there's a long way to go. Adoption is not immediate. I think, personally, I'm sure we're going to get into this, but personally, I think that creating regulatory certainty and establishing a regulatory environment where consumers and investors feel more comfortable getting into the space, and where also, innovators and developers feel like they have the certainty to really set something up here in the U.S. rather than another jurisdiction, I think that goes a long way to increase adoption and have the technology become more ubiquitous. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, I know. I think that's all very helpful just to think about where we are, and the comparison back to like literally when an iPhone was built, how long it took for apps to come around, I think is a really good one. And I also think, Jorge, if we want to get personal, oh yeah, we got Congressman Soto here. Is what I'm being told live.
We'll get personal after that.
We're going to introduce Representative Darren Soto.
Right on.
Gosh, I didn't intend that to be like Moses parting the Red Sea there. I was really enjoying the discussion and looking forward to hearing a little bit more about it. As we look at the digital path to prosperity, I'm just excited that we're having a discussion as Hispanics about a key issue. I want to thank the sponsors who are doing such amazing work to help CHCI. If you're a CHCI intern, raise your hand. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you for coming up here. We're big supporters of the program. Whenever we do the graduation, we always ask all the sponsors, how many of you all started as interns? Big, powerful administration people and members of Congress and big-time government advocates, and almost everybody raised their hand. So it's so important that we support these internship programs. I get to serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee and also on the Ag Committee, as well as co-chair of the Blockchain Caucus. So we get to work on a lot of these issues. The meeting I had right before I came here today was with a whole group of Venezuelan asylum seekers, right? And we were talking a lot about the destability down there, and we're helping them with TPS and with a parole program. But it's been cryptocurrency that's actually come into places like Venezuela and Ukraine to help with a fiat currency that's just collapsed. And so when we're talking about real-world applications in Latin American and in Hispanic countries, especially in places where there is an issue with dictators like in Cuba or in Venezuela, that this can help make everyday Venezuelans be able to have some ability to conduct transactions. And we really are able to take for granted the fact that we have a monetary system here that we could utilize, and we don't have to think about it every 5 seconds. I represent the Central Florida area, and we're starting to see some of those use cases. I was excited to hear you're going deep into remittances. That's one of the big areas we'll see cryptocurrency really take market share of. I wouldn't want to be investing in a traditional remittance company right now, I guess. Hopefully they're not one of the sponsors today. And also in international transactions. So in Orlando, we have folks from across the globe coming in to visit our world-class theme parks. And so everything from planning your trip to buying tickets and different experiences, if you're coming from Australia or from Brazil or from Japan or from Argentina, you're able to skip a lot of the transaction costs by going through cryptocurrency. So I think that's going to be more and more important. And then a really important point, which is why, it's proof with our audience here today, is young Hispanics are very interested in this area. When you look at the gap when we're trying to bring broadband to high-speed internet to all corners of the United States right now, You see a lot of effort helping nuestros abuelos y abuelas learn all this stuff, but the use of everything from social media to cryptocurrency to artificial intelligence to you name it among young Hispanics is higher than a lot of other demographics in the United States. So these are conversations we need to continue to have. Lastly, I'll say Congress, not the fastest institution in the world, but things are finally starting to move a little bit. We passed out of the Ag Committee and the Financial Service Committee the FIT Act, which would finally put in place a regulatory regime for cryptocurrency that would have a registration program. It'd be through the CFTC, which a lot of folks are coming to the consensus that cryptocurrency is a commodity or a currency at the very least, and only rare instances as security. And so defining it through CFTC is a really important one for a lot of us. But having a registration system in place, having $120 million in funding for regulators to be able to regulate in this space are going to be keys as we go forward. And if you happen to talk to some of our senators, it'd be great if they moved along a little on this. The Senate's slow, by the way. You probably know that, and old, but you could tell them about that. And then we're also working on empowering the FTC on blockchain technologies generally to help protect consumers. So a lot of this is brand new, so that's an exciting thing for all of you as younger folks coming in to look at where you want to work on policy areas, or whether it's as an entrepreneur or in a nonprofit. That a lot of technology issues, it's not like people have been working on this for 20, 30 years and there's all these experts around here. People are really learning this stuff right now, so look out. See, some technology doesn't work all the time, but so I just want to welcome everybody, and I'm really excited to see so many young Hispanics in this room who are excited in cutting edge technology. So thank you everybody for having me. I'm looking forward to the remaining discussion, and thank you for your courtesy. I appreciate it. You bet.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it has been nice to see more leadership, honestly, from Congress and the Blockchain Caucus and Congressman Soto and everybody else who's really taking the charge and educating. That's obviously a big piece of what we're trying to do here. So again, thank you to CHCI for helping us organize all this. And Jorge, what we were talking about was the personal piece of it, and Congressman Soto just hit on a lot of it. But I think when it comes to that use case, you and I were talking before. Your daughters are in Argentina.
Yep.
I mentioned the inflation.
Sure.
We talk about the U.S. it's funny because all these dollars on chain right now, stable coins, are dollar denominated. So it's a question of, are we as a country still leading the way just by virtue of being the currency everybody wants? And is there any expectation that that's going to change just because you introduce crypto to the mix?
Yeah, I mean, so try to address a few things. One is, of course, I do appreciate the shout out from Congressman Soto about the CFTC. So it was nice to hear that. I'm glad he didn't say the SEC. Otherwise, I would have had to leave.
You would have had to leave immediately.
Exactly. But no, that was a great shout out. And if you think about it, the U.S. enjoys. Look, I'm sorry, I'm going to philosophize with you guys for a second, but I think that a lot of people do not fully comprehend the fact that the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency for the world, right? And as a result, most trade is done in U.S. dollars. We have much of our lifestyle in the United States is based on the fact that the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And so you're sort of getting at, could crypto upend that? And my general thought, my own opinion is not really, in the sense that, as you said, most of the stable coins are already in U.S. dollars. There are so many different choices. Of course, you have stable coins in anything, but the market has spoken in terms of when people are minting them and buying them and using them, they generally do it with U.S. dollars. And we were talking earlier, too, about Argentina. Right now, so who here is from Argentina? Any Argentinians? No? Okay, we have one, yay, very good. So, welcome. And who here has been to Argentina? Do we only have one? Okay, we have a few more here. Exactly, right, a few more. And so if you've been to Argentina, you know that Argentina is dealing with 140% a year inflation. My daughter's down there right now studying at the University of La Plata, and the common problem is that as soon as somebody has money, they need to take it out of pesos and move it into something else, because in less than a month, 10%, if you, each of you that are paid in this room, if there was a 10% inflation rate here, you would immediately try to move your money to something else so that you could have it stable. You move it into dollars, and then when you need it, in Argentina, you move it from dollars back into pesos when you're ready to spend it. So I think, again, this is really why crypto itself leads to a real opportunity for people in Argentina, because it's an opportunity for them to move their money. In fact, one of the other really weird stats that most people don't know is that the Argentinian government allows up to 20% of your salary to be done in kind. And by that, it means that Argentina allows people to be paid in cryptocurrency, which is sort of a weird stat, right? But you can take some of your funds and move them straight into cryptocurrency. But toward the question about, do I think that these things challenge the U.S. as a dominant currency, I don't see it certainly not in the short term, not in the next 30 years. But the pound obviously was the dominant currency. It's no longer. So, anything can happen. Hopefully all this innovation, all these bright minds here, all of that will help to cement the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency for the world going forward another 50, 100 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, it raises questions about kind of how this whole, global economy changes when you introduce this technology into it. And obviously a lot of projects are thinking about what they would back their currencies with. Argentina, of course, for a long time pegged their currency to the US dollar, and that kind of sparked some bad things when it didn't work out so
right.
well in 2001. And, obviously there have been experiments in crypto as well, trying to peg stable coins to the value of other cryptocurrencies that also didn't pan out so well. But I think, one of the main questions around how the US plays a role in this, and why I think we're here, is talking about the pros and cons around it, because you could do nothing and theoretically lose your standing as, Jorge, what you were kind of talking about is this privilege that we all have by being Americans, that we can kind of print more money as we wish, and no one can really do anything about it because we're the economy that matters. And that's fun for a bit until you run into problems. And I think, Brett, that's kind of one of the elements that people enjoy from crypto, being a public ledger, Bitcoin being hard money that can't be produced more than 21 million. It's always going to be 21 million. That is, maybe perhaps we're getting into the panel where it's the most important pieces, why we all care about it and why it matters.
Yeah, well, a couple of months ago, I forget who it was, but I saw a tweet from someone, crypto is very active on Twitter. I myself am not much of a Twitter person, but I've tried to get more into it. Someone tweeted, which I thought was interesting, something that was to the effect of, I don't want to be advocating for the Bring Crypto Back to the U.S. Act of 2050, which I thought was kind of an interesting way to put it and kind of hit the nail on the head. And if you compare it to, so I guess to back up a little bit, to give it a little bit of context, the U.S. right now is home to roughly 50%, roughly half, of the 100 most valuable fintech companies globally. We are losing 2% of that share per year for the past 5 years. So that's 1 million jobs over the next 7 or 8 years that we could potentially be losing here in the United States, as well as just the economic growth, the purview over what these companies are doing, the ability to directly regulate them as U.S. companies. We want companies to grow and innovate here in the U.S. We don't want to lose that. But then back to sort of the crypto aspect of it and the possibility of a Bring Crypto Back effort in roughly 30 years. If you compare it to sort of what's happened with chips, with semiconductors, it's not apples to apples exactly, because crypto is technology that's not set up physically somewhere in the same respect as manufacturing. But chip manufacturing, the development of chips, really happened mostly in the United States. And then, in the 80s, 90s, as certainly part of a larger offshoring effort, manufacturing of semiconductors all left the United States. And it seemed like it was okay, it was fine. We obviously learned during the pandemic that we are extremely reliant on chips, that it is crippling to our economy to not be able to get semiconductors in an efficient, fast way for all the things that we need them for. It cost the auto industry billions of dollars because they couldn't sell cars because they didn't have chips for them, because most chips are manufactured in Taiwan. It presents a national security risk. If something were to happen in that region where they couldn't export chips here, what are we going to do? So we saw the administration, rightfully so, members of Congress, scrambling to get chips back here, bring chips back to the United States. We don't want to be in that same situation with digital assets. And to Jorge's point, maybe you don't see an impact on the dollar as the reserve currency for the next 30 years, but decisions that we make now are going to impact us in 30 years. And what we always say is, really, whether you love crypto or hate it, you could be an extreme crypto skeptic, or you could think it's the greatest innovation that we've seen in 100 years. Our interests are the same. Regulate it here so that we can keep an eye on it, so that we can impose United States values and regulations on it here. Chairman Gensler at the SEC has sort of publicly acknowledged that an offshore exchange is much more difficult to bring an enforcement action against than something here in the United States. So keep it here, allow the innovation to occur here, allow the job creation here, and also the cop on the beat from folks at the CFTC and SEC and whatever other agencies may find themselves involved in the regulation of crypto.
Yeah, the regulation point is a very important one, and I want to save that one maybe for last. And obviously, Jorge, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts as the other agency kind of stepping in and regulating this too. But maybe just from a personal standpoint, Janessa, I don't know if I asked you before about kind of what got you into the space in terms of using the technology. Obviously, at Cash App and Block, you kind of have to if it's being put on there. But I mean, there are so many different things. Me personally, my brother gave me half a Bitcoin as a graduation present. Wow. And he never lets me forget about it because it's not worth $300 anymore. And so, for people looking at it, I don't know if there's like a personal takeaway from kind of why people, aside from like, okay, number's going to go up, or maybe it is all number go up. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like when I first heard about Bitcoin, I was in college, and it was before this massive bull run that happened a couple years ago, but it was just kind of this exciting new technology that was getting a lot of buzz, and I didn't know much about it. And then when the price started skyrocketing, the excitement that was around that was just like really exhilarating. But for us here in the U.S., I feel like we perceive it in such a way that's kind of an investment tool. Like, we see the volatility, it goes up and down, and people kind of use it as a way to try to get rich quick, or that's kind of how we see it here. But I think, back to your personal question, what got me intrigued by it was kind of the global potential, which we've been discussing here today. I used to work in the Senate as a policy advisor, and my boss was leading the bipartisan infrastructure deal that was negotiated a couple years ago. And it was a tiny crypto tax reporting requirement where they defined a broker and were trying to tax digital assets as a funding mechanism. And that woke up the industry. A lot of people came and lobbied our office. I think we're responsible for all of the jobs that have come about, the government relations teams for crypto companies now. But I think it was important for the industry to wake up and start lobbying Congress on what this technology is, because people on the Hill don't really know until it's too late. So kind of to Brett's point, like, thoughtful regulation is super important now. That's what gets me excited from the policy perspective of trying to walk that fine line of, okay, we want to ensure there's consumer protection, but we don't want to go too far on the regulation to where you're stifling the innovation and pushing that offshore. We want to be known as a welcoming environment to new technologies here, even though initially, with any new groundbreaking technology, it's always scary at first. People like to relate it to the internet, of course, and look how far we've come since then. So it's exciting to see where this technology will take us. I think we want to make sure that we craft the regulation in the right way.
Yeah, Jorge, I don't know if you have anything on that, because that's basically, the big question that you deal with on the daily, and Janessa's right. I mean, I remember where I was when that whole, it was a failure, I think, of even understanding how this space works to try and add something or require something that legitimately the companies couldn't provide. And everyone woke up to the fact that, maybe the people writing the laws don't actually understand how this technology works. And I know your whole day in, day out is basically trying to explain to people at the CFTC how it all works.
Exactly. I mean, at the CFTC, my office is really one of the most major focuses of it is education. And you mentioned what got us into it. The thing for me was just the technology. Sorry, I'm the geek here. So so when I was looking at this technology, I said, "Wow, this is very interesting." And the thought that something could run on its own out there in a trustless environment where you trust no one, and yet Bitcoin does its thing. Again, this is not talking policy. This is not talking CFTC, perspective. Just my own perspective. The technology is fascinating. So yeah, I do think that from a policy perspective, that's a little bit outside of my lane, so have to be very careful about saying it, other than people come to us all the time and they want clarity, right? They want to have some idea. Is it a commodity? Is it a security? People want to see that the U.S. have regulations so that they know that it's safe here and that they can work with it. So yeah, so the technology is what got me excited, but certainly what we're seeing when people come in our door is lots of people that would definitely like to have some policy, some certainty in the regulations so that they know, that they can build a firm. Let's say, you're talking about things going offshore, knowing that I can build it here and I'm not going to get in trouble later on. And so, creating jobs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the strangest thing to watch, even over the last 2 years, and maybe kudos to everyone who's worked on the policy front to maybe get people on the side. To have a blockchain caucus, by the way, is pretty wild to think of where, all attitudes on Bitcoin were just a few years ago around it being, oh, Bitcoin's only used for fraud, which is maybe the top fact that we would all maybe on this panel agree is wrong. And Brett, I don't know if there's a piece to that, because even today you have politicians still taking the side, and maybe this is just how politics works, of I don't want to listen to the facts, but I'm going to be anti-crypto because that might be more favorable in my district. And I don't know if there's a point that you would maybe clarify there around educating people on why some of this stuff is important.
Yeah, I mean, we can't put crypto back in the box, even if that's the desire of some lawmakers for whatever reason, that they are skeptics of crypto, of the technology, of the actors in the space. We can't put it back in the box. It's not going away. It's growing. I think it's about 16% of adult Americans have purchased crypto directly, which is more than actually the 15 or so % of adults in America who have purchased stocks directly, which is a pretty, I think, compelling figure. And I think it's about 70% of those folks still hold crypto, despite the downturns that have been experienced and the negative headlines. Folks are still interested in the space, and they're continuing to operate in it. So it's not going away. The answer from our perspective is certainly to regulate it, to allow it to innovate and thrive here in the United States. And I just want to make a quick point about regulation, because Janessa talked about it as well. If you look at sort of major pieces of financial regulation that have occurred in the past few decades, you had FIREA coming out of the savings and loan crisis. You had Sarbanes-Oxley coming out of the accounting scandals, Enron, and all of that. You had the Dodd-Frank Act coming out of the financial crisis of 2008. All of these big pieces of financial regulation have really come in response to something going poorly. And with crypto, we have an opportunity to regulate in advance. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is really just regulation by enforcement. The SEC has brought, I think, about 125, 130 enforcement actions against crypto companies in the past decade or so, and has yet to write a single rule that really provides clarity for companies that want to operate in the space. So it's great that they're on the beat and they're taking some bad actors out of the system. In other cases, they're bringing enforcement actions against companies that believe they're complying with everything that they know to comply with. But what that does is it really fails to protect investors and consumers in advance. This is after losses or harm has occurred and when bad actors are in the space. And it doesn't provide any clarity for businesses that want to grow and innovate here. So we want to be proactive about establishing regulations so that companies can build and grow here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think there were a few examples of bad things happening last year that may be on the same kind of footing of an Enron or something else that would make people want to create laws that protect people. But Jorge and Janessa, I feel like that is the piece that is interesting when you think about the old system in trying to protect everyone, and a new idea of you're in charge of your own decisions in terms of you control your wallet. There is no bank you can go to and say, hey, someone stole my money or there was fraud on my account, please return the funds. It's gone in the sense that, okay, if you control your own wallet, there are certain decisions that are up to you and how you want to safeguard these things. As a regulator and as someone who's enabling access to let people buy Bitcoin and trade these things or use them, I mean, how do you look at maybe the safeguarding, the safekeeping, how much the government or regulators need to still do that? Or if this whole movement's about letting everyone take autonomy into their own hands, letting them actually lean into it?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of a difficult question. Part of it is that, I mean, some of you that have crypto, you're self-custodying, you're keeping track of your own private keys, and some of you will do it, using a centralized exchange. I'm going to do a quick audience poll here. If you have the majority of your crypto, for the first question is majority of your crypto in a centralized exchange, and then the second question would be if you have your majority of your crypto on chain where you have your own private keys. So just show of hands, a centralized exchange, the majority of your crypto is there. Question one, then I'm going to ask the other question. So centralized exchanges.
It was a small panel to choose from here,
Yeah?
a small
Okay.
subset.
Sorry,
By the way,
me
a
too.
huge overlap between the interns and people who are trading crypto. So that's
Yeah, I
also
think
something
they're
to take
taking
away.
all, and for those that are self-custodying, all right, we got, it's okay, so a little bit more of the self-custodying, and that shows, a little bit more sophistication in a way, because people that are self-custodying, you have to be very careful to not lose your private keys to be able to hang on to it. So I think that what happens is people want that autonomy, at least what I see in my role.
Mm-hmm.
They want that autonomy until it goes wrong, and then they come and I'll do a conference like this, and people pull me aside and say, I had one guy pull me aside. He says, "Look, I have been ripped off 8 times, but there's a company that reached me, and they said that they can get my money back for me if I pay them $1,000." I'm like, that will be the 9th time you're going to get ripped off.
At least you saved him.
Right, exactly. I saved them $1,000 because I'm like, they're not going to be able to get your money back once you have given your crypto to somebody else. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, which is to say that ideally, we have to have both, right? It's good to have people to have that autonomy. For those of you that raised your hands, you have your thing, you custody it yourself. But I think people also need some regulation. They need some way to be able to claw back. As an example, one of the things that CFTC cares about is bankruptcy. And we want to see people's crypto holdings being kept separately from the value that's being held by the exchange. FTX would be an example of that. It would have been great if that had been
there are
custodied
plenty
off
of
to the
examples.
side.
Yeah, there are a few examples to pull from last year. And Janessa, I assume that's probably why the block is so kind of careful about what's listed and why they do things the way they do, but
Yeah.
as an operator.
Yeah, thankfully we only hold Bitcoin on the app, so that provides a little bit of cover. But I would say, like, back to your self-custody point, that's why companies are coming up with innovative ways to help make that process easier and the onboarding easier, because it does take a level of sophistication. It's very difficult for you to understand how to custody your own assets right now. So even at Block, we're coming out with a product called BitKey, which has been announced and will be rolled out soon fully, but it's basically a 2-factor authentication where you have this little moon rock looking thing that's the physical hardware wallet, and then your phone is one of the keys, the wallet is one, and then Block custody is the third part. So if you lose any of these things, you can still access your Bitcoin. So that's kind of like innovative ways that companies are thinking to work around and advance this technology to where it's easier for people to custody it themselves. But in the meantime, if you're going through a centralized exchange or a platform like Cash App to purchase your Bitcoin or any other form of crypto, you are kind of reliant on them to be compliant to some sort of regulation. You're assuming that they are. You're assuming that FTX was, and clearly was not. So I think from that perspective, it's important to understand, people love to say crypto is the Wild West, and they use those examples. It's not. If you're going through a regulated US-based exchange or platform, there are strict regulations. Like at Block, we have a BIT license through the New York Department of Financial Services, which is a robust regulator of digital assets, and we have money transmitter license in all states that require them, but the regulation is happening at the state level right now. Yeah. So there's kind of that gap right now where we're pushing, Brett and I, for federal clarity, a federal regulatory framework to have that consistent through all 50 states. And so that's why it's important to have that thoughtful regulatory clarity so that customers aren't just left to assume that their assets are safe and there's not 100% clear guidance on that.
Well, I wanted to leave time for us all to maybe quickly add one thing or two each, but I also promised questions from the audience too. So I don't know if there are. Oh yeah, there's something going on over here. I don't know. There's microphones. What do we want to do? Oh yeah, we got one. Okay.
So we have a few questions coming in from the app. The first one is, crypto/digital prosperity isn't taught in schools, and it feels like you have to go out of your way to even grasp the concept. What's a good place to start for someone who is completely out of the loop? And that was from Alexandria Duque.
That's a good question. That's a good question. It's live in the room right now. That's a fresh question, is what that is. I mean, that's kind of why I started. I think you would probably all agree here, by the way, that even traditional financial tools aren't really taught in
It's
school.
not adequately taught in school, no. I
Yeah.
mean, they're teaching you chemistry and not teaching you what it means to get a student loan and what compound interest is, you know?
Yeah.
So I agree with that point, that the financial curriculum in high school should probably be updated. Or I've been out of high school for some time. Maybe it has been updated, but back in my day, it certainly could use a refresher. But I mean, I think there are a ton of sources of education. I think it depends on what the person asking the question is really, if they're hoping to invest in crypto and how they're trying to learn more about that. There's a lot of sources that I think will provide some education. If you go to cryptocouncilforinnovation.org, you know, there's a lot of one-pagers and different materials that will, you know, sort of provide some foundation for the technology and why it's important and why we want to keep it in the United States. We don't really have investment advice, so that's a little bit of a different beast to tackle. But there is so much out there, and I do sort of understand that there are so many companies that are sort of operating in the space right now. Mm-hmm. And it is sort of like the advent of the internet, where we saw so many, and many of them, you know, would rightfully sort of be weeded out over time when regulation was established and you know, things sort of settle. So we are sort of in that phase right now where it can seem overwhelming, just the sheer volume of options.
Yeah, I'll plug Coinage, which is, you know, the publication I started, which is built on some of this stuff and explaining it a normal way, plus Crypto Uncomplicated, another newsletter that I started to try and explain some of this stuff in a normal way. I don't know if we have more questions, because I do want to budget enough time for that, but also, yeah, we do. Okay, that's fair.
Okay, we have another question. It says, many countries with high inflation, conflict, and depreciating currencies rely on American dollars through the black market. How does cryptocurrency compete with hard cash in these precarious economies?
Jorge, you want to take that one?
I think you
Dollar
outlined
blue?
that the best.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, look, I've spent a lot of time, you know, we talked about this before. My family and I travel pretty extensively, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you know, you look in Argentina, of course, you know the blue dollar, right? But the blue dollar is the official, unofficial black market rate in Argentina, that everybody knows what the rate is. So I think my gut feeling from Argentina and some other places that the majority of it is in dollars, because it's there, it's safe, it's tangible. I know I have it. But crypto certainly makes inroads in these places. There are a lot of places, though, where I'm sure people wish that they had the crypto. When we've traveled, like my daughter and I recently were in Guyana, and we met a lot of refugees from Venezuela and refugees from Cuba, or we were in French Guyana and we spent time with Syrian refugees and Afghani refugees. And for these people who are sort of unhoused, they are waiting to try to go to their next place, if they had their funds in cryptocurrency, that makes them a lot safer when they're living outdoors, waiting for a chance to go to a better life. So, I know we're sort of running out of time here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we are. Yeah, we're good on the questions. Yeah, all right. So we'll wrap up here then. I think we hit everything there. I think quickly, if you guys want to just add one more bit, you know, whether it's more of what you're working on, or what people should know.
Sure, I'll start. So I kind of wanted to put a finer point on what Janessa was talking about as well, and Jorge, on self-custody. You know, I think it's just really important that, I think what Janessa's outlining on the innovations that are being developed to provide some protection and some, you know, easier ways for some of these things to operate for people, I think that's important, but there really needs to be a balance between protection and choice. And to just give a really simple example of comparison, you know, if you decided that you wanted to keep all of your assets in a plastic bag full of cash, and you lost that plastic bag, that would be terribly tragic, but you have the choice to do that. Wouldn't recommend it necessarily. So I think it's important for there to be a balance between protecting investors and consumers. That's badly needed, and in a lot of finance, certainly crypto is desperate to have that, but also allowing people to have the choice to own their assets, to have control over them, and not have to rely on intermediaries if they choose not to.
I would say the same. Diversify is always important. And arguably, I mean, even if you do just have a small allocation, we're not doing investment advice here, but everyone's free to make their own choices here. But I do think that that is important, and not having all your eggs in one basket is a tried and true thing for even before we started talking about cryptocurrencies. Jorge, I don't know if there's anything to sign off with.
I'll sign up with this, which is to say, where we are at this inflection point with crypto is, again, going completely off of the CFTC world, but just sort of thinking about it, stepping back. When we think about the moonshot, when we think about men going to the moon in the 1960s, there's so much that came out of it. I was looking this up, like solar panels, foil blankets, scratch-resistant glasses, digital cameras, fireproof clothing. There's a lot of stuff that came out of that, and we didn't know what we were going to learn by doing that. I think what we're seeing in crypto, which to me is the most exciting thing as a technologist, not as a policy person, but as a technologist, is that things that are happening in the crypto world are now bleeding over into finance. So recently, the BIS did this thing called Project Mariana, and they're using automated market makers like Uniswap for doing cross foreign currency exchange, which is just crazy. You would have never thought of the BIS using a Uniswap-like mechanism to do foreign currency exchange. So both TradFi is learning from DeFi and DeFi from TradFi. It's pretty exciting. We don't know where the innovation is going to take us, much like we didn't know where it was going to take us when it comes to the moonshot.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I would echo it. Everyone is leaving. Sorry, I'm distracted. So I think it really just lost my train of thought.
Yeah, it's difficult because they were loving it too.
Yeah. No, I guess for this group, like, you guys are all young people who are super excited about policy. Your advocacy is super important, I would say, as a former Hill staffer who's, been in the House and the Senate. If you're bombarding our offices with phone calls or tweets or emails, things like that, like, letting your voice be heard and galvanizing your friends to also let their voices be heard is impactful. So I would just say continue to engage in this space and look forward to see what you do in the future too.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for being up here with me today, and thank you again to CHCI, and thank you for everybody coming out to listen.